for joining us today to go back in time to look at a remarkable period in Hawthorne history. Councilman Mark Schoenfeld is here with us. All of the people assembled in this room today have had something in common with Jack Northrop's P-61, not so affectionately called Black Widow. Why Black Widow? Because it was designed in 1939 in a Hawthorne hotel where the deadly spider held sway.
Cindy Macha is the curator, and she's done a fabulous job. To my left is Pat Macha, who's a teacher at Hawthorne High School, and he's an aviation archaeologist, and it's the only one I've ever met. And Pat's going to tell us some pretty incredible stories. He goes out to various crash sites and recovers parts from aircraft and tries to reconstruct the story behind the cause of the crash. A few pieces you'll see here on the table were from an actual crash here in California. To Pat's left is Roy Wolford, who was the official photographer for Northorp Corporation for several decades, worked for Northorp Corporation for about 65 years, I believe. And he was one of the crew members on the P-61 that caught fire in the air, and he jumped out of it. Across the table from me, we have Jerry Hubin, who was part of the engineering team, and he participated in the design of most of the Northrop fighters, as well as some aspects of the P-61 Black Widow. And with that, I'm going to let Pat tell you a little bit about aviation archaeology.
Thank you. It was interesting a number of years ago to meet with Roy Wolford, and he described his bailout from a P-61C in 1947 over the Mojave Desert. And that prompted me to wonder what would remain at that particular wreck site. And thanks to some photographs that Roy was able to provide for me, we were able to locate this site. And I knew that not a lot would be left today. Homes have been built in that area. It's on flat desert and fairly accessible. But remarkably, there was about 2 to 3% of the airplane remaining. My sister and I went out just a few months ago in the late spring and did a little bit of digging, used a metal detector, and you can see the material on the table in front of us, which includes part of a seatbelt fitting, also some structure that would have held perhaps an oxygen bottle, a magnesium welded structure, and we have some plexiglass from the aircraft. The airplane did burn, so there was some damage from fire, and also from the soil itself. Metal will react interestingly in various soil groups or types, and so we have some corrosion evident on this particular wreck. I started looking into plane wrecks in the early 1960s as a hobby, as a kid working at the Centinela Valley YMCA camp up in Barton Flats, and in 1962 found my first airplane wreck, and that got me going on this. So thanks to Roy Wolford and his interesting, very interesting story, that got me out on the desert to look for this particular site, and I was real pleased to be able to find it and enjoyed spending several hours going over that site.
How do you know? Do you have an interest in aviation engineering? How do you know what all these pieces were?
I would use cutaways like what we see here, which are very helpful in determining structure of the aircraft, and I'm not familiar with all aircraft structure or all types, so I have to refer to reference books. But I'm glad to do the research, and in this particular case, we have the serial number of this aircraft to begin with. That was helpful. We knew it was a P-61C. Whenever we look at wreckage like this, I'm always looking for parts, manufacturer stamps, any telltales or clues that would help identify the aircraft. And that's part of what aircraft archaeology is. And it's also an aspect of contemporary archaeology, because everything that I look at is just within this last century. Nothing more really than 100 years old.
And you also are getting involved in a water search for a P-51 Mustang, aren't you?
We're looking for Gertrude Tompkins Silver west of Los Angeles International Airport, then Mines Field. She disappeared in October of 1944. She's the only missing woman pilot from the Second World War, WASP pilot. On behalf of her family and her surviving sisters, we'd like to bring closure for them. We'd like to try to locate that site.
The occasion for this particular flight was the first takeoff and flight of the Northrop YB-49 Flying Wing, which was a conversion from a propeller aircraft to the early jets. We had 8 jet engines, Allison engines, and they developed about 4,000-pound thrust per engine. And this was the first flight out of Hawthorne Field, and we were flying escort on it. And my assignment was to photograph it and also to shoot footage, 35 millimeter footage, which was going to be used by the 5 newsreel companies that were in existence at that time. And we had taken off and flown out, flying along with the wing past Mount Baldy, turned north, and were headed towards then Muroc Army Air Base, later called Edwards Air Force Base. And we had just passed Baldy and were on the downslope, and there was a P-80 with Captain Wharton was flying an escort also, and he called and said that it looks like you have a fire. Well, we checked and had no fire warning lights on the panel, so we were sitting about 75 feet under the wing checking landing gear and such, and we decided just to continue doing our job. Well, sometime later, Captain Wharton called and a very distinctive voice indicated that your airplane is on fire. And I looked down at the number 2 engine, and I saw what looked like water pouring out of the accessory section, like somebody was pouring it out of a bucket. And it turned out that was 100-octane aviation fuel, and it was running out into the exhaust where the turbo supercharger was, and ignited and was flowing back underneath the wheel well and was being sucked up in the wheel well and back in the boom going towards the tail, this being a twin boom aircraft. And as I looked back at the tail, the rudder fabric was on fire, and there was a string of black smoke as far as I could see behind us. And so it looked pretty serious at this point. So there was later to be one of the flight engineers on the flying wing, Don Swift, was riding in the radar operator's compartment in the rear, and I told him he better prepare to leave the aircraft. And the pilot, Slim Perrette, had his parachute harness hanging over the seat and not on, and he was wearing a heavy B-15 flight jacket, which was rather bulky. He couldn't reach back and get a hold of the harness, and so I put my camera stuff down behind the seat and crawled up and was trying to help him to get into the harness. And we were falling out of the sky at this point. We had no control of the aircraft. And after several attempts, I finally got a hold of it up to where Slim got his hands on it, and tight enough that he could squirm around and get enough slack to get into the harness. And then when he went to release the canopy, the escape hatch over the cockpit, it was designed to peel away, but we didn't have enough forward airspeed for that to occur. So as a result, they had to push this over the side, and it was flopping up and down in the wind and hitting him on the knuckles, and I saw cracks developing in it and decided I was going to get a face full of plexiglass. And so I told Slim that I was ready to leave the aircraft, and he was standing up with one foot in the seat and hanging onto the windshield and trying to push this canopy off the aircraft. And so when I decided to go out, I had worked in making a motion picture on how to escape from the P-61 for the Air Force, and we found that leaving the aircraft from the forward section was hazardous to your health because your chances of hitting the horizontal stabilizer was about 80%. So I had decided that I was going to try to dive out on the wing outside of the boom and try to miss the horizontal stabilizer. And when I did, I saw that the top of the wing above the wheel well, where the fire apparently was the paint was burning on top of the wing. And so that didn't look too inviting, but there was no other opportunity but to go through that. So I dove out on the wing, and my goggles flew off in the slipstream, and one of my glasses broke, and I saw two pieces of a lens sliding like slow motion off of the wing. I wasn't going anyplace. And eventually my feet shifted on the wing, and I went off the trailing edge and got myself stabilized in the air and waited for the horizon to come up a little bit and opened my chute. And when I went to put the ripcord inside of my jacket, I found that I had burnt paint and molten aluminums all down the front of me, clear down to my shoes, that I had slithered through this molten aluminum on the top of the wing. So we got the chute open, and I checked, and I saw a parachute several thousand feet above me, which turned out to be Don Swift, who had gotten out. And then later I saw the aircraft, the booms and the empennage had come off, and the airplane was inverted and burning and falling like a large kerosene rag on fire. And I saw it impact on the ground. And then I discovered that I was drifting right down the Boulder Dam power line, and had to slip the parachute, and I landed about 100 feet to the south side of the Boulder Dam power line in a side of a wash. And all three of us got out, and nobody sustained any real serious damage. Don Swift, who was in the back, damaged his nose and some teeth in the front. He hit them on a bulkhead getting out, and but Slim and I got out without too much trouble. But the aircraft, it turned out, someone had not installed a Marmon clamp properly, and it had separated, and the 2 inches of 100-octane aviation fuel was free-flowing out into the exhaust, and which was ignited and, of course, caused the whole problem. And so, as Pat has indicated, the wreckage, the pictures of the wreckage showed that the airplane did land upside down, and with the fire continuing to some degree, and being out there in the desert, there weren't any fire rescue people handy, and so it had to burn itself out. And it took about an hour before they got any emergency equipment out there, and we all survived.
It's an amazing story. It's even more amazing that you could reconstruct the cause of the fire and the crash when there's so little left of the airplane itself.
Because we had the visual picture of the fuel flowing out of the accessory section, and there would not have been doing that unless there had been a separation in the fuel line coming from the tank going to the engine. And so that made the determination of cause much more simple.
Also, you said when you were coming towards the Boulder Dam power line, that's about 99,000 volts?
I don't know exactly what the voltage is, but it was these large towers with all these lines running from Victorville. It came from Las Vegas down to Victorville, and then came across and into through Mint Canyon and on into Los Angeles area.
And you said that you had to slip the parachute to avoid the line. Is that a maneuver very much like slipping an airplane?
You pull your shroud lines on the side that you want to collapse the chute and cause you to drift over to that side. And I was able to do that, and as I said, landed about 100 feet to the south side of the power lines.
So you had some control even with the parachute?
Yeah, you have some minimal control. And then I rolled up my parachute. There was a service road running along the power line, so I put my parachute in the center of the service road, and then the parachute that was coming down up about a quarter of a mile up the hill from me, I went up there to find him, and fortunately I did, because Don, with the injuries that he had sustained, his back, because the door had hit him in the back when he got out of the aircraft,